All right, this video you're going to see might make you want to punch the screen, but RFK Jr. Decides to differentiate his stance between the conflict that's going on in Israel and Gaza and Ukraine-Russian conflict. And so he even also rails against any ceasefire in Gaza, drawing parallel to the U.S.'s denazification efforts in World War II Germany. And he's indicating that was a just cause, and I guess he's doing a click copy paste by saying what Israel's doing in Gaza is a just cause. But as we have shown, and as the rest of the media is now slowly getting to, while independent media stays 20 miles ahead, dare I say it, 100 miles ahead of corporate media, everyone has acknowledged the fact that there is, yes, war crimes and starvation happening in Gaza. There is, again, mass starvation, and potentially a million people could die of starvation, lack of nutrition. But let's hear from RFK Jr. He was on Piers Morgan's show. Dude condemn hummus. You condemn hummus. So try not to punch the screen. I will keep my pausing to a minimum. I know occasionally I've broken that promise, but I'll try and follow through.
About Israel and Ukraine, because you've been very supportive of Israel in the war with Hamas, but very unsupportive of America helping Ukraine against Russia. And I'm just curious how you see the ideological difference, because from where I sit, currently in London, but from where I sit, you have a Russian dictator illegally invading a sovereign democratic European country, and that country struggling to repel the Russian invader and desperately needing our help. And America remains the number one help it could possibly have, and we all know that. And so America's assistance to Ukraine may or may not determine whether they can stop a Russian victory. And in Israel, they are attacked by Hamas, October the 7th, horrendous attack. And they're responding, and they're trying to get their hostages. And there's a lot of controversy about how they are executing that war. But you're fully supportive of them responding to that invasion on October the 7th. How do you differentiate? I mean, obviously, they're different situations, but ultimately, it's about the same kind of principle of a people being attacked and then having the right to defend themselves. And America, very supportive at the moment of both. Why do you object to one, not the other?
Yeah, it's contextual, Piers, and here's the reason. I'm anti-war.
I know I said I wouldn't pause, but the man's saying he's anti-war, but he's indifferent to what's happening in Gaza. Now, look, here's where we stand with both these conflicts, the one in Ukraine and the one in Gaza right now. They are a waste. They're a waste of time, energy, resources, and lives. As far as I'm concerned, this ridiculous conflict in Ukraine has been a perfect opportunity for corrupt politicians, especially here in the United States, to earn a huge financial killing, no pun intended, to, again, fatten up their wallets. As we have talked about, many of these politicians, both Democrat and Republican, have profited heavily off this war, as has the military-industrial complex. And let's not forget the massive amount of corruption that's in Ukraine. And as for this horrific conflict in Gaza, well, you know, as we have talked about, and as we've mentioned before, the New York Times in an article indicating, and more people are talking about now, that Israel was given a heads up that there was going to be some kind of attack taking place around October of 2023, and they ignored it. And since then, what have we witnessed? We have witnessed many, many, many horrific, atrocious war crimes taking place in Gaza. That's been done by the hands of the IDF. Reporters, journalists, humanitarian workers dying, men, women, and children dying, be it by military actions or by starvation. This is madness and insanity, but yet RFK Jr. has the audacity to say he's anti-war. I think he speaks out of both sides of his mouth.
I think most of the wars that we fought over the past 100 years were immoral wars. I think the only war that we fought that was actually a moral war was World War II, because it wasn't a war of choice. It was a war where we were attacked. It was a defensive war. We were attacked by an implacable enemy that had declared its intention to destroy Western democracies, Western values, and to conquer the world, to establish essentially a German caliphate that they call the Third Reich.
A German caliphate. I mean, the Third Reich. That's what you call it.
But most of our wars, including World War I, were wars of choice. My grandfather protested World War I, lost a lot of his friendships, but it was a war to benefit bankers and arms dealers. And I think the Ukraine war is the same. It's a war of choice. It's a war we should never have had. It's a war that President Putin, we provided the provocation, which was our insistence, irrational insistence of putting NATO into Ukraine. We were involved, of course, in the overthrow of the democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014, and then we put in our government sympathetic to the United States, which invited NATO into the country, which since 1992, the Soviet leadership, long before Putin, was saying that's a red line for us, and Russia has good reason for that. We wouldn't let nuclear weapons be put in Cuba.
Yes, but even as we speak right now, because of our conflict and our interventions in Ukraine, Russia is knocking on the door of Cuba saying, hey, guys, remember us? So what we do to the world, hey, who's to say the world won't do to us? Click, copy, paste. Isn't it interesting how the world not only does the whole repeat, but the rhythm and rhyme of the repeat?
Was there in 1962. And this is on his border. It's 4 minutes from Moscow.
I would say that this is where there's a slight inconsistency in your moral worldview of these things, because when it comes to Israel, whose leader, Netanyahu, is facing corruption charges, unlike Zelensky, and whose leader authorized payments of billions and billions of dollars to Hamas because it suited him to keep the Palestinian Authority and Hamas at loggerheads with each other, that you support without any equivocation continued ongoing support for that government and Netanyahu and what he's doing when much of the world is enraged by the scale of the response to October the 7th. And I would simply say that there's an inconsistency there. You don't seem bothered about Israel corruption or about the billions of dollars being funneled to Hamas to prop them up. And yet that's the kind of stick you want to beat Ukraine with, where the leader is not facing corruption charges. What do you say?
Let me answer your first point first. I supported the attack on Tora Bora to get rid of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. I did not support the takeover of Afghanistan. And I think that there was an appropriate response to 9/11, and the U.S. response under President Bush and Vice President Cheney and Rumsfeld was a catastrophe for our country.
Marvin Vargas, a caliphate. He's trying to paint this with Islamophobia and radical Muslims to justify Gaza extermination. And let's face it, there is an extermination happening there. Starvation, people getting killed, civil. I mean, what remains of Gaza? I mean, at this point, the Israeli government has made it very clear that they're not leaving. They're staying there. They're going to occupy the whole thing. Yes, I know it's already been occupied, but this time now, they're making sure that they're going to be moving in, probably, potentially, Israeli settlers in there. I mean, it very well could happen with the amount of destruction that has taken place. It's probably going to happen.
Country for the world, for our moral standing around the world, and for our strength. I'm not a supporter of President Netanyahu. I've been a longtime critic of him. I was critical of his judicial reforms. I'm not a co-signing anything for Likud or President Netanyahu. The Israeli government and Israelis themselves are very, very critical of President Netanyahu and absolutely dismayed and disgusted with his authorization of the $1.4 billion payment from Qatar to Hamas and the reasons for he did it, which he was explicit about, to strengthen Hamas, to make to make it peace impossible or any kind of conciliation with the Palestinian Authority impossible. Most people in Israel are not supportive of President Netanyahu, but they are supportive of this policy. There's a unity government, as you know, in Israel that is all sides. And there's a war cabinet that is represented by all sides, and they support the need get rid of Hamas. And
well, one of that war cabinet the war cabinet is 3 people, and one of them just resigned. So they're not.
Yes, and there has been a key number of leaders in the Israeli government that have resigned. And it is a sign that Netanyahu's own government and this attempt to do his wag the dog moment is more or less becoming a huge problem. Because before October 7th, Netanyahu was dealing with protests, people who wanted his government to be disbanded, and more importantly, him to be removed out of office. This war, the reason why it's still ongoing, the reason why he is not pulling out of the city of Rafah or anywhere else in Gaza is because once the war is over, people will then automatically, their brains will click and remember, oh, wait a minute, yeah, Netanyahu, he's a big old pile of shite. And yet that guy is going to be speaking to Congress.
Oh, an agreement, are they?
Yeah, well, no, but Benny Gantz did not resign in protest of any specific war policy.
Well, no, he resigned because he doesn't believe there's any end game. There's no end game, he says. There's no plan for the day after the war. Well, he's right, there isn't.
RFK, do you need Rabbi Shmuley to step in there for you? See, again, look, just to be clear here, when RFK Jr. made his announcement, I looked at his campaign and his overall strategy and what he was trying to do. I looked at it with great interest, and I had, the audacity of hope that maybe, okay, who knows, maybe we might see something from this. And when he decided to run as a third-party independent candidate, I was all in favor for it. Very good, because you're wasting your time being part of the DNC, because the Democratic Party rigs primaries. But as soon as October 7th rolled along, as well as other videos coming out, shout out to INN and numerous other people, bringing up the fact of RFK Jr.'s connection to Rabbi Shmuley, as well as to AIPAC lobby groups, and it's quite clear that he's no different than Trump or Biden when it comes down to the crisis that's happening in Gaza. And there is no day after tomorrow. There is no plan once the war is over. Netanyahu doesn't have a plan. His plan is to make sure this war is continuing on for as long as it can so that he could still remain in power. I mean, this is how a lot of, sick dictators and tyrants and apartheid governments work. This is how power maintains itself. This is how, again, you have to keep a distraction going on. And RFK Jr., because of his connections and his blind support, he's not going to say anything.
Well, I agree there should be an end plan as well. So but that's not the question. The question is, do we need to disarm? Does Israel need to disarm Hamas before a ceasefire or get the hostages back? And I would say the hostages have to be returned and Hamas has to be disarmed. Or else, how can you have a peace? I don't know.
How do you disarm? How do you disarm?
But
how do you disarm the rest of Hamas? We're not sure how many are left, but certainly thousands of them when they're embedded now.
Okay, well, look. Again, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? Here's the thing. With the absolute unchecked destruction of Gaza, where all of it's a moonscape. It's not 80 or 90% hell. All of Gaza is a moonscape at this point. It's been completely destroyed. No infrastructure, no water, electricity, internet, nothing. No roads, no bridges, no schools, no universities, no places of worship. And I mean all places of worship, because it wasn't just mosques that got blown up in Gaza. There were also churches too. Community centers, residential homes. I mean, at this point, all what the IDF has done, all what Netanyahu's government has done is create the foundations for the next war. And to all of Israel's neighbors, even those that are allied with Israel, just remember, what you're seeing in Gaza could very well happen to you. And everybody must keep their heads on a swivel and one of their eyebrows raised up always. In fact, sleep with one eye open. It's interesting how the whole world is indifferent. And again, RFK Jr., Mr. Anti-War himself, is quiet about it. Listen to his answer. Try not to punch your screen. I'm going to rewind just a little bit, but please. Cell phones are expensive, all right? Laptops are expensive. And we don't live in a world where they knock on your door and say, hey, I bought myself for you. Wouldn't that be great? Let's rewind this.
Do we need to disarm? Does Israel need to disarm Hamas before a ceasefire or get the hostages back. And I would say the hostages have to be returned and Hamas has to be disarmed, or else how can you have a peace? I don't know.
How do you disarm? How do you disarm?
But
how do you disarm the rest of Hamas? We're not sure how many are left, but certainly thousands of them, when they're embedded now in refugee camps amongst hundreds of thousands of civilians, millions of them. And so every time you launch an offensive against them, as we saw with the apparent targeted attack on 2 Hamas terrorists in the Rafah camp, and as you saw with the rescue of these hostages, one of them led to 50 civilians being killed. The other ones led to, depending which numbers you believe, anything between 100 and 274 people being killed.
Remember, it was a rescue operation for 4 hostages. What a successful mission. 274, dare I say at the bare minimum, maybe 100 people dead. Wow. It's like they just went in there and sprayed and prayed, you know? They didn't decide to have controlled fire or anything like that. Like, you know what they probably did? Probably did like a good old Rambo, had the weapon at their hip and just shot in that area. Didn't know what was going on. How the hell do special forces or rescue operations work like that? I mean, that is very unprofessional, especially in a refugee camp where people are dead or dying, severely wounded, weak.
So at what point does this desperation to eliminate the last members of Hamas get overtaken by the sheer volume of civilians being killed in the process, which I cannot believe will do anything longer term than foment the ideology that drove Hamas in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, you're...
And hold on, we're going to rewind that again because, look, folks, the survivors of that rescue operation, well, they're going to be telling their story, you know, depending on how this war ends. I mean, there will be survivors. There will be, but so many people are going to remember what happened from the start of October 7th all the way to its end of this conflict in Gaza. And I like to say that we're going to have a better future, peace in our time, but I would be lying to you. I would be lying to you if I said that, once these wars end, there will be peace. It's not how it works. The next war will be waiting 10 years or 12 years down the road. And it's because of the actions of right now Israel and the IDF and what they've done to the people of Gaza. No one will ever forget. And to all those people, and I know I said this before, I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but to all those people that you've heard, and I'm pretty sure all of you have run into some version of it in your lifetime, or if not, you will run into it, of some dumb idiot saying, if I was alive during the Civil War era, why, I would be part of the Underground Railroad and help free the slaves. If I was alive during World War II, I'd be part of the resistance and hide the Jews from the Nazis. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't do shit. You want to know how you would act during those times? Well, you're acting like it right now, okay? Now, I know that there's a lot that all of us wish we can do to make things better. We're doing the best we can. But to all these people who say, oh, never again, this will never happen again, well, folks, the actions of Israel and the IDF has made sure that there's going to be another click, copy, paste version of a war happening. It's going to happen. Just when it will happen, soon, 10 years, 12 years, give or take, but it'll be around the corner.
You're asking a lot of questions.
Civilians being killed. The other ones led to, depending which numbers you believe, anything between 100 and 274 people being killed. So at what point does this desperation to eliminate the last members of Hamas get overtaken by the sheer volume of civilians being killed in the process, which I cannot believe will do anything longer term than foment the ideology that drove Hamas in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking a lot of questions, and I'd like you to give me time to answer them.
Sure.
You know, and you could ask the same. You brought up Nazi Germany as a kind of an analogy for what's happening in the Mideast, and not, in 1945 or 44 at Casablanca, Churchill and Roosevelt had an argument because Roosevelt said we have to denazify Germany. And if we don't denazify Germany, it is going to, the Nazis are going to rise up and do the same thing again. Churchill did not want an unconditional surrender for the Nazis. He said, we'll have to kill too many civilians to do that, and everybody will fight for the death. But Roosevelt won that argument. We killed about...
So the man is talking about in comparison, comparing two wars to each other. And so apparently, I guess, according to RFK Jr.'s big brain, worm brain, that in order to destroy Hamas, we must utterly destroy Gaza, an area that has been an open-air prison, occupied, men, women, children being blown up and shot at, even in locations where there's no Hamas at, even though, according to IDF intelligence, they said that they are there. Are you sure? Are you 100% certain? Because, the IDF has screwed up. Case in point, I'm just going to give one example, where they destroyed not one, but the 3 trucks part of the World Central Kitchen Aid workers. Remember? They blew them up. Never once has Intel get things wrong. And that's not even scratching the surface. That's just doing a light little dust of the surface. Light little dusting of the surface. Light little dusting of the surface. You know what these actions that the IDF is doing right now in Gaza? It is only furthering and causing more people to go to Hamas, or either that become more extreme themselves. You're just not going to beat it out of people.
Committees and not, in 1945 or 44 at Casablanca, Churchill and Roosevelt had an argument because Roosevelt said we have to denazify Germany. And if we don't denazify Germany, it is going to, the Nazis are going to rise up and do the same thing again. Churchill did not want an unconditional surrender for the Nazis. He said, we'll have to kill too many civilians to do that, and everybody will fight for the death. But Roosevelt won that argument. We killed about 2 million Germans during World War II in order to get into Berlin and denazify it. Today, Germany is the richest country in Europe.
Wow. So all we got to do is just bomb them to death in Gaza, and Gaza could be the richest occupied territory in the world. Oh, wait. Looks like it's going to be occupied and annexed. Sorry, said that wrong. Into Israel. So it'll be rich. The people? Who knows what's going to happen to the people?
It's one of the most powerful economies in the world. I think it's the 4th most powerful. And nobody's scared of Germany because it's a peaceful country. And today, Hamas, which is authoritarian control of, hasn't won an election in 16 years, of Gaza, is a corporate kleptocracy, and it's absolutely intent on one issue only: to just annihilate Israel and to kill all the Jews. And in their charter, Hamas has a provision that says it is against Islamic law to even negotiate with Israel, except as a ruse. So I don't see how people who are saying, well, you should have a ceasefire, then what? And what you've rewarded Hamas for taking hostages, and they're going to keep taking hostages to get more and more advantage. And this is, by the way, the 5th ceasefire. On October 7th, they broke a ceasefire.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So are you going to go back to that status quo?
Well, I don't think there's any future. I don't think you can have any future. I don't think you can have any future there with Hamas retaining any form of power whatsoever. Nor do I think Netanyahu.
I agree.
So look, what can we take away from this? What can we take away from RFK Jr. Being indifferent and rallying against the ceasefire in Gaza? I can't take him seriously. His whole campaign, look, there's no difference between Biden, Trump, or RFK Jr.'s stance on Israel, because AIPAC and the lobby groups know who to buy. Even though he's running as an independent, AIPAC is right there. He probably has an AIPAC babysitter. Chances are it might be Rabbi Shmuley himself. I'll let you decide on that one. But there's a little thing about this whole thing about denazification, There's a thing called Operation Paperclip there, my friends. You know, when we took a lot of German scientists and bureaucrats. How, how do you think we got to the moon? How do you think we got to the moon, people? It may shock you. There's a thing called the V1 and V2 rocket that was made by Germany during the last days of WW2. And these were rockets, self-guided rockets that were being pointed at Britain. And a lot of those engineers and scientists and individuals who were familiar with that project were spirited away to the good old US of A. We also had a lot of German officers and commanders, part of NATO. The whole talk about denazification, it's a very interesting concept. But did it go away? No, it didn't. No, it did not. It did not. And the thing is, we need to address this too, going further. Because here, I want to pull up this video here from Case Study QB. The UN accuses both Israel and Hamas of war crimes. Don't tell that to RFK Jr., though.
And a UN inquiry, Paula, into the first 2 months of the war in Gaza has concluded that both Israel and Hamas committed war crimes as well as grave violations of international law. What can you tell us about this report?
So this is a report that the UN has been preparing for some months now, a 200-page report. It looks at the timeline of from October 7th until the end of 2023. And what it says when it comes to Hamas is that they believe Hamas intentionally attacked civilians. They accuse them of murder, torture, taking hostages, including children. And when it comes to the Israeli side, this report alleges that Israel committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, specifying about starvation, arbitrary detention, and killing and maiming tens of thousands of children. Now, Israel has rejected this out of hand, saying that it's trying to create a false equivalency between Israel, the state of Israel, and Hamas, also pointing out that it proves systematic anti-Israel discrimination when it comes to this particular group.
So hey, they're doing both sides, but let's talk about this. Amid ceasefire talks, Israel's siege still causing child starvation. That's right. That's what's happening here. The United Nations Relief Agency for Palestinians. Remember, after all, RFK Jr. said that Palestinian people are most pampered people, right? Said Thursday that Israeli authorities continue to hinder aid efforts by failing to approve requests for delivery and permits as two other UN agencies separately issued dire warnings about large-scale starvation in Gaza this week. And as I reported on yesterday's show, potentially maybe 1 million people could starve to death. Isn't that fun? Isn't that great? Isn't this the world we want to live in, where war crimes like this continue? No, it's not. The United Nations Relief and Workers Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, said Israel has frequently denied the agency's aid-related requests. The Guardian reported the World Health Organization said Thursday that there have been 32 cases of deaths from malnutrition in Gaza, mostly children below 5 years old, since October 7th, and warned of catastrophic hunger and famine-like conditions faced by a significant proportion of Gazans. The World Health Organization statement followed the UN's Children Fund, UNICEF, warning that humanitarian access in southern Gaza had declined dramatically and that 3,000 malnourished children there are at risk of death, having been cut off from life-saving care due to the Israeli military offense in Rafah. The horrific images continue to emerge from Gaza of children dying before their families' eyes due to continued lack of food, nutrition supplies, and destruction of healthcare services. Now, RFK Jr. still wants to say that he's against, well, any kind of ceasefire. Well, Mr. Anti-War, I think you're a hypocrite, speaking out of both sides of your mouth. This crisis in Gaza will not end. There is no day after tomorrow. There is no plan. The plan by the IDF is to occupy and annex all of Gaza, to control it, to have it under their control. That's it. Simple as that. Remove it off the map. But it won't end. The war, the next one, is right around the corner. And the cost may be more than any of us could bear.